Hello there. Welcome to the Light Story Club. Settle in and find a comfy spot to relax. Before we get to the story, I would love to know your favorite myths and monsters. Comment where in the world you are and let's begin the story. I was born in a room with no corners. The walls curved gently like the inside of a teacup, and the ceiling shimmered faintly like the surface of water just before it's touched. There was no door, only a window, round and wide, showing a sky that never stayed the same color for long. Sometimes lavender, sometimes copper, sometimes that murky blue you see just before a dream begins. I remember the sound before I remember anything else. Not voices, not cries. Just a soft TCHK. TCHK, TCHK, like a clock trying to remember how to tick. That sound lived in the center of the room. A tall, spindly grandfather clock stood there, twisted like a vine that had grown confused. Its face was cracked and its hands spun backward, then forward, then stopped altogether before starting up again when no one was looking. I loved it before I even knew what it was. They say most goddesses are born in storms, in fire, in sacred light. I was born when the 13th hour struck on a day that didn't exist. The grown gods, timekeepers and dawnbringers and bookbinders of eternity tried to pretend I hadn't. They whispered things like an echo birth, a bent loop, an error. But there was no denying I was here. I had hair like faded photographs and eyes the color of shadows under sundials. My fingers were small and slow-moving, like they weren't sure if they belonged to a child or a memory. I remember trying to play. Not with toys, but with moments. I would gather the quiet seconds that slipped between others, the almost hiccups in time. I would cradle them in my arms and watch as they flickered, a butterfly that turned into a teacup, a kiss that hadn't been given yet, a laugh that never quite escaped. No one came to visit, not at first. The gods were busy with clean hours and bright destinies. They didn't know what to do with a child who lived in the gaps. So I made friends with the furniture. The armchair spoke in sighs, sinking slightly every time I sat down like it had remembered an old dream. The mirror on the curved wall didn't show me as I was, but as I might have been, had things turned out a little differently. One day it showed me laughing in a meadow, the next, standing at the edge of a battlefield in robes made of unraveling stars. I liked to press my forehead to it and ask, which one is real? The mirror never answered, but sometimes it winked. The only living being who visited regularly was the crow. It wasn't an ordinary bird. It came through the window just before dusk every other day, carrying odd gifts in its beak, a half-finished lullaby, a broken wristwatch, the scent of a birthday someone had forgotten. It would drop them in my lap, then perch on the curve of the window and blink at me with eyes like spilled ink. I shall call you Yarrow, I told it once, because names felt important. Yarrow never cawed, but once it tilted its head and I heard, not with my ears but in the soft space behind them, a name for me, and none for yourself. I frowned. I have a name, I said. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what it was yet. I only knew what the silence called me when I cried too quietly for time to notice. Saralith. One day, the clock stopped making any sound at all. The room grew heavy. Time hung like a curtain that wouldn't lift. I curled up in the armchair and listened to the stillness thicken, like soup cooling on an abandoned stove. I whispered to the chair, to the mirror, to Yarrow, but none of them answered. And then something happened that had never happened before. The clock began to tick again. But now, it ticked outward as if each beat was moving away from me, stretching reality thin. A soft tear opened in the air beside the clock, long and narrow like the crease in a well-loved book. From that crease, a woman stepped through. She was tall, wrapped in gauzy robes that shimmered like fog before sunrise. Her hair was pinned up with feathers and falling stars, and around her wrist dangled a bracelet made of tiny, silent bells. "Hello, child," she said. "You've been waiting." "I don't remember that I was," I replied honestly. She smiled, sad and curious. "That's because you wait sideways. It's how you were made." I stared at her. She didn't feel like the other gods. The ones I heard about in the snatches of songs Yarrow brought. She felt undone, the way dreams feel undone. "Who are you?" I asked. "I am the Whisper of When," she said, "and I've come to bring you your first duty." That was the day I first stepped outside the room with no corners. That was the day I stopped being only Serelith, child of the broken hour. That was the day I began to grow. The Whisper of When did not walk as others did. Her feet never touched the floor, but moved just above it, like she was standing on a second no one else remembered. She held out her hand to me, and though I had never touched another being before, not really, I reached for it. Her fingers were cool, soft, and smelled faintly of rain on stone. "Where are we going?" I asked. She smiled. "Not where. Not even when. We're going to what almost happened." And just like that, the room with no corners unraveled. It did not collapse, or vanish, or spin. It unstitched, like a hem slowly coming undone. The air turned to thread, the ceiling to whisper, the floor to a memory of touch. My hand was still in hers as we stepped through a tear in the fabric of what is. It was like falling, but slowly, and sideways, and not at all. We arrived in a hallway that stretched in every direction at once. It had no floor, and yet we walked. No ceiling, and yet we did not float away. Every wall was a window, but the scenes beyond the glass shifted like thoughts. Too fast to fully catch. I saw a boy reaching for a kite string that snapped before he caught it. A girl opening her mouth to say something important, but the wind took her words. A mother who meant to turn around and hug her child but never did. A man who almost danced, almost laughed, almost stayed. The Whisper gestured to the windows. These are almosts. Moments broken off like buttons, lost behind time's furniture. I stared at them. Some made my chest ache. Others made me smile in that faraway way, like a song you used to know. "These don't seem very important," I said quietly. She looked down at me, and I saw galaxies in her eyes, not stars, but empty spirals. The places where stars used to be. "Serelith," she said gently, "the world is not built only of what happens. It is just as much made from what doesn't." That sentence stuck to me like dust. We came to a door. It looked ordinary. Wooden, square, with a brass handle that had been turned 1,000 times. On it was a plaque made of ticking. "This is your first tending," said the Whisper. "Tending?" She nodded. "You are a goddess of broken time. You do not fix. You do not prevent. You tend. You soothe. You gather. You listen." I placed my hand on the door and felt its heartbeat. Unsteady. Unsure. Inside, the air smelled like tea gone cold and paper left in the sun. A little boy sat on the edge of his bed, staring at an open notebook. He wasn't crying, but his shoulders had that soft sag, like something inside him had slumped forward in disappointment. "He had a dream," said the Whisper beside me. "A beautiful one. About writing stories, about becoming someone who stitched words together like magic. But today, a teacher laughed at one of his sentences. Just one. And now the dream is slipping." I ached. Not because of the boy's pain, but because of how small the reason was. How easily dreams unravel. "What do I do?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Whatever feels like tending." I stepped forward. The boy didn't see me, not really. Mortals rarely do. But he shivered slightly, the way you do when you think someone has said your name softly. I touched the corner of his notebook, and from the space between its pages, I drew out the sentence he had loved the most. It glowed faintly, a little bruised, but still alive. I held it against my chest. Then I opened my palm and blew gently. The sentence floated upward like a dandelion seed. It spun once around the boy's head, then drifted into his ear. He blinked. Slowly. Then, he reached for his pen. The whisper of when placed a hand on my shoulder. Well done. I turned to her, eyes wide. Did I fix it? No, she said softly. You reminded him it was his. Back in the hallway of almosts, I walked differently. Not with confidence, but with a kind of careful wonder, like walking through fog full of unseen flowers. You are growing, said the whisper. Not faster, just deeper. That night, back in my room of no corners, the grandfather clock was ticking again, but slower. Less like a machine, more like breathing. Yarrow sat on the window ledge and dropped a gift in my lap. It was the pen the boy had almost given up. There are some people who forget too easily, and then there are those who remember too much. Who hold on to everything, every glance, every phrase, every mistake. They become heavy with memory, full of yesterday's weight. That's who we were visiting next. The whisper of when met me again by the crooked grandfather clock. This time she didn't say anything when she arrived. Just handed me a stone. It was perfectly round. Smooth and faintly glowing, the way the moon glows behind thin cloud. Etched across its surface were impossible patterns. Runes that shimmered and changed shape whenever I blinked. What is it? I asked. She looked at me with a sadness that felt older than anything. A forgetting stone, she said. You will only need to use it if she asks. Who? But she was already opening another seam in the air, a long silver ripple in the wall of my room. As I stepped through, the world around me rippled too, like time was sighing beneath our feet. We arrived in a room that was both too full and very empty. There were stacks of journals on every surface, worn, heavy, ink-stained. Some were tied shut with red string. Others were bursting open, their pages fluttering even though there was no wind. A young girl sat in the center of the floor, surrounded by the journals. Her hair was dark and long, her back curled as if carrying something unseen. She didn't look up when we entered, but I felt her noticing me. She writes everything, the whisper said quietly. Every hour, every breath, every fear, every kindness, every mistake she believes she's made. Why? Because she's afraid of forgetting who she is. I stepped closer. One of the open journals near her had a phrase underlined over and over again. I must not forget the time I made her cry. I must not forget. The letters were scratched so deep into the page I feared she'd torn it. I knelt beside her, quietly. She was rocking slightly. Not like a song, but like someone trying to stay upright in a world tilting sideways. I remember everything, she whispered. I don't know what I'm allowed to let go. Her voice cracked at the edges. Not from weeping, but from the weight of holding it all inside. I looked to the whisper of when. She gave me the faintest nod. Not permission, exactly. Something softer. Trust. So I did what I had been taught to do. I tended. I reached out and touched one of the fluttering journals. As I opened it, a rush of sound escaped: laughter, apologies, slammed doors, whispered confessions. The sound of too much. Would you like help? I asked the girl gently. She looked at me. Her eyes were bruised with memory, and yet, still full of longing. Yes, she whispered. But I don't want to forget all of it. Just the edges. I took the forgetting stone from my pocket. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat slowed by dreaming. I pressed it to the open journal, and the ink began to lift, not vanish, but soften. It blurred into light mist, rising gently off the page. The words faded not into nothingness, but into feeling like a scent you once knew in childhood but couldn't name. Her shoulders sank, and for the first time, she breathed like a child instead of a record keeper. I did not erase her memories. That isn't my work. I only loosened their grip. She reached for my hand. "Will I still be me?" she asked. I smiled, and the whisper answered for me. Even more so. Back in my cornerless room, the air was full of soft echoes that night. Yarrow brought me a scrap of paper from the girl. On it, in looping handwriting, was written, "Today I remembered how it felt to forget something and not be afraid." I tucked it beneath my pillow. The grandfather clock ticked once forward, then once back. And then it rested. Some moments stretch, not because they are long, but because someone refuses to leave them. They get folded, looped, worn thin with remembering. Like a beloved page read too often, until the ink smudges and the corners curl inward. That's who I was sent to visit next. The whisper of when arrived in a storm of silence. Her cloak dragged along the floor, collecting little glints of forgotten bells and wilted petals. She didn't speak this time, just handed me a key made entirely of soft chimes. It wasn't metal. It was made of something older, like wind that had hardened into shape. "What does it open?" I asked. She only looked at me. Not with warning, but with something heavier, knowing. The seam she opened this time was narrow, barely wide enough for me to pass through. I had to turn sideways, like slipping into a memory that wasn't quite mine. On the other side, I found myself in a room where everything had stopped. The curtains didn't move. The light through the window did not change. A spoon hovered mid-fall near a bowl of oatmeal on the table. A moth floated just above the lampshade, frozen in the soft stillness of not now. And in the center of it all, a boy sat cross-legged on the floor. His head was tilted slightly, as if listening. He did not blink. He did not breathe. But his eyes were wide open, and in them I saw repetition. Something looping. Something sacred. I knelt beside him. He was very young, with hair that curled around his ears and fingers clutched tightly around something in his lap. It was a music box. Old, scratched, shaped like a carousel. The kind that plays a tune even after it's wound too far. I looked down at it, and something strange happened. My thoughts slowed. The walls melted into the same second again and again. The tune from the box played, but only one bar of it. Over and over and over again. And in that moment, I felt it. His mother had given him the music box just before she left. Not forever, but for a long time. "I'll be back before the song ends," she'd said. But the song never ended. He'd made sure of it. He'd trapped himself inside that first bar of music. Over and over again. If the song never finished, then the promise never broke. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't foolish. It was tender. Pain made small enough to hold. I knew what I had to do. I took the key of chimes from my pocket and wound the box slowly, carefully, until it clicked. The next note played. Then another. The full song spilled out into the air like water finally escaping a cracked jar. And with it, time began to move again. The moth flapped once. The spoon clinked into the bowl. The light shifted gently against the walls. The boy blinked and began to cry, not with despair, but with release. "You kept your promise," I whispered. "You held it so carefully." He didn't speak, just reached out and placed the music box in my hands. It was warm, not with magic, but with memory. When I returned to the room with no corners, I placed the box beside the grandfather clock. That night, it played a new tune in the spaces between ticks. Yarrow brought me a ribbon, soft and green, that smelled of the boy's hair. Tied to it was a note, barely a whisper, "It's okay if songs end. That's how they begin again." Time isn't always something you carry. Sometimes, it carries you. And sometimes, it doesn't carry you forward. It carries you inward. That's what this chapter is about. This one wasn't about another person. Not a boy, not a girl, not a mother or a music box. This one was about me. The room with no corners had changed. I didn't notice it all at once. Not like a thunderclap, more like moss slowly covering a statue. One day you look around and realize, it's not the same anymore. The grandfather clock now ticked in both directions. The walls curved in a little more closely, like they were listening. The dust motes hung in midair just a breath longer than they used to. Even Yarrow, who had once been just a bird, had grown feathers made of folded parchment. He nested in a lantern and whispered old secrets to himself while he slept. And then one day, something new appeared. A mirror. It wasn't a big mirror, just the size of a dinner plate, framed in blackwood and spider thread silver. It hung from a single hook, and beneath it, a bowl of dark water sat quietly on a pedestal of stone. I approached slowly, because I had never seen my face. Not truly. Not in full. When I looked, I didn't see a reflection. I saw an hourglass, its sand suspended, both falling and rising at once. And then, like breath fogging the glass, my image appeared beneath it. My hair was darker than I imagined. My eyes carried that same faint glow as the whisper of Wen's galaxies without stars. I had freckles like little constellations, and skin that shimmered when I moved. But more than that, I saw cracks. Fine, silvery cracks ran across my cheeks, my arms, my collarbones. Like someone had pieced me together with broken moonlight. I gasped. I touched my face. Was I broken? The whisper arrived beside me, not as a sound, not even as a presence. More like a memory that slid into place beside my own. "You're not broken," she said. "You're inherited." I didn't understand. So she placed a finger against the glass, and the cracks glowed brighter. "This is how all-time gods are born," she whispered. "Not from perfection. From shattering." I looked at the mirror again. The hourglass pulsed behind my image. Every broken second we mend, every fractured moment we tend, it doesn't heal us, Serelith. It reveals us. And then she was gone. Not in a vanishing kind of way. More like she had never been there to begin with. Just me, the bowl of water, and the mirror that remembered too much. I dipped my fingers into the bowl, half expecting it to ripple or glow. It didn't. It just felt cool, soft, real. And in that stillness, I understood. This was my first real self-time. Not time for a task. Not time for attending. Just time to look inward and see who I was becoming. I stayed there a long while. Maybe hours. Maybe minutes. Maybe something else entirely. And when I left, I didn't walk away. I folded myself back into the shape of the room. And the room welcomed me gently. That night, the grandfather clock chimed 13 times. Yarrow brought me no gift, only a feather from his own wing. I tucked it behind my ear, curled into my cloud pillow, and dreamed of mirrors that didn't reflect, but remembered. It's easy to forget names, but sometimes, names forget themselves. They slide out of syllables, grow too heavy to pronounce, or dissolve into dust between the pages of memory. This time, I was sent to a place rather than a person. A great place. A lonely place. The whisper of Wen didn't meet me with riddles or objects this time. She simply placed a hand on the center of my back, right where my spine met that glowing seam of stardust, and pushed, gently. I tumbled through a whisper. A hush. A hush that turned into a hall. The library was enormous. Not tall, wide. It stretched left and right in both directions without end. The shelves were crooked and yawning, their books teetering in tired stacks. Some were made of parchment, some of bark. A few glowed faintly, and others hummed. Dust danced in the air like tiny ghosts with nowhere to go. The silence was loud here, not angry, just full of what had once been said. I walked quietly, my bare feet making soft sounds on the marble floor. The deeper I wandered, the more the titles faded. Some books were blank entirely. Others had smears where words used to be. A few repeated the same line over and over. I was important once. I was important once. At the heart of the library was a desk, and behind it sat a woman made of paper. Her skin was inked vellum, her hair unraveling scrolls. Her eyes were library stamps, soft red, slightly smudged. She didn't look up when I arrived, but her pen kept moving across an invisible page. "I've forgotten my name," she said flatly. "I know," I whispered. "I've forgotten all their names, too." She gestured around the library with a tired sigh. "I try to write them back into being, but the ink won't hold. Every time I think I've remembered, it vanishes again." I stepped closer. Her hands trembled slightly, her fingers stained black with forgotten syllables. "What did this place used to be?" I asked. She looked up for the first time. Not with anger, not even sorrow, but guilt. "A place that held time," she said. "Every memory, every story, every lost moment that didn't fit anywhere else." I felt a small ache in my chest. It was the same ache I'd felt with the boy and the music box, with the girl and her journals, with the mirror and its cracks. Something precious was being held too tightly, and it had slipped away. I took the pen from her fingers. At first, she clutched at it. But then, her hands fell still. I dipped the nib into a tiny inkwell I hadn't seen before. It was filled not with ink, but with moments, those tender little flickers that glow just before sleep. Then I wrote one name. Saralith. It glowed on the page. The paper librarian blinked. "That name. I remember that name," she said, slowly, as if it were a warm drink in a cold mouth. Then I wrote hers. Or rather, I wrote what she had once been known as, "She who holds the echoes." The pen shimmered in my hand, then vanished. And so did the librarian. She didn't vanish like someone erased. She unfolded like a page finally turning after too long pressed closed. She became a breeze that moved through the shelves, a warmth in the binding of the books, a hum that whispered names too softly to hear. The library breathed again. When I returned to the room with no corners, Yarrow dropped a small paper note into my hands. It said, simply, "We are not forgotten, only waiting to be remembered." I placed it on the windowsill. The wind didn't take it. Not this time. Most things grow toward the sun. They reach and stretch and unfurl. Roots grow downward. Leaves rise upward. Time, it seems, marches forward like a steady drumbeat. But not always. Some things bloom in reverse. Some seeds remember too far back. Some trees bend time, and not the other way around. This one, this tree, had no name, but it remembered one. The whisper of when arrived through the ceiling this time. She poured through the cracks in the plaster like gold smoke. I didn't even flinch. By now, I had grown used to strange entrances. She said nothing, but handed me a seed. It was smooth and warm, the color of milk tea, and shaped like a teardrop caught mid-fall. The moment I touched it, I heard a sound. UN growing. The sound of leaves folding back into buds, bark smoothing, rings unwinding. Then I saw the door. It hadn't been there before, but it had always been there. It opened into a clearing that hummed like lullabies sung in reverse. The air smelled like sap and dusk. I stepped out barefoot onto soft moss, and there it stood. The time tree. Its roots hung in the air like threads from a torn sky. Its trunk was upside down, wide at the top, narrowing toward the mossy earth. The leaves shimmered silver and bronze, fluttering not in the breeze, but against it. And its fruit. Not apples. Not pears. But little clocks. Some ticking. Some frozen. Some spinning backward with urgency. I approached it reverently. As I neared, a small clock fruit detached itself from a branch and floated gently into my hands. It was warm and throbbed with quiet panic. Inside the glass, I saw a child, just a glimpse. A girl, sitting alone in a garden, clutching her knees. She was waiting for someone who would never arrive. A parent, perhaps. A friend. A promise long broken. The clock ticked backward, then forward, then stopped entirely. This wasn't just a memory. It was unfinished time. I knew what to do. I cradled the fruit and pressed the seed, my seed, gently into its side. There was no flash of light. No thunder. Just a tiny sigh. The clock began to tick again. Not forward. Not backward. Just onward. The tree shuddered. It did not weep. Trees don't do that. But I felt it. The same way you feel a breath before sleep. A whisper in the spine. Then, to my surprise, one of the dangling roots dipped low enough for me to grasp. I reached up and held it. And just like that, I was pulled upward, not away, not out, but back. I saw flashes as I rose through the roots, a child letting go of a toy they'd once refused to part with. An old woman remembering the name of her childhood dog. A forgotten song hummed softly beneath a floorboard. A tear shed in a moment no one noticed, finally acknowledged. The tree was giving those moments home. I understood, then, what kind of goddess I was becoming. Not one who stopped time, but one who gave it shelter when it broke. I awoke back in my room with no corners, curled in the hollow of Yarrow's feathered warmth. The seed was gone, but the fruit, the little clock fruit, remained on my bedside table. It no longer ticked. It pulsed, like a heart. That night, the grandfather clock ticked in a perfect circle. Yarrow brought me a feather stained with sap and starlight. And I dreamed of roots that reached the sky. There is a place where time seems to pause. Not because the world stops spinning, or the stars cease their dance. But because someone inside has held on so tightly to a moment that the afternoon itself waits, suspended like a breath caught between heartbeats. This house was that place. The whisper of when found me sitting by the window. She didn't say a word, but her eyes held something heavy, something like regret folded inside silk. She gave me a small key this time. Old. Warm. Smooth as river stones. I tucked it in my pocket and followed the fading light down a road I'd never seen before. The house was at the end of a long lane, where the trees bowed low like old friends saying goodbye. It was quiet. Too quiet. The garden was wild with flowers that had never bloomed or never withered. Just frozen in soft hues of gold and lavender. The front door creaked open before I could knock. Inside, everything felt dusted with a soft glow. Shadows pooled in corners that shouldn't exist. In the parlor, a woman sat by a window. She did not turn when I entered. Her hands held a letter, folded and yellowed with age. Her eyes were fixed on the sunlight that pooled beneath the glass. Her mouth moved, but no words came. I stepped closer. "Why do you stay?" I asked gently. She sighed. A sound like wind through dead leaves. "I wait for the last goodbye," she whispered. Someone who promised to return at twilight, but never did. I looked around. Clocks lined the walls, dozens of them. Each one stopped at a different time. Some ticked backward. Others ticked forward, but none matched the hour outside the window. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. "It fits here," I said, holding it up to the old wooden clock on the mantel. She looked at me, hope flickering like a candle flame. The lock clicked open. Inside, a small music box rested, dusty and silent. I wound it slowly. The soft melody began. The woman's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, the house seemed to breathe. The garden outside shimmered. The clocks began to tick in harmony, and the afternoon shifted, no longer caught in endless pause. She turned to me then, and smiled. "Thank you," she said, "for reminding me that some goodbyes come softly, and that holding on too long only makes the waiting harder." I stepped outside into the fading light. The house glowed warmly behind me. Yarrow circled overhead, dropping a single lavender petal at my feet. I picked it up and pressed it to my heart. That night, the grandfather clock chimed 11 times, not early, not late, just right. And I dreamed of afternoons where goodbyes finally arrive. Shadows are not always dark. Sometimes they are soft, even gentle. Sometimes they are the quiet parts of ourselves we forget to hold. This garden was full of those shadows. The whisper of when came wrapped in the scent of wet earth and jasmine. She led me to a wrought iron gate half swallowed by ivy. Beyond was a garden tangled with vines and wildflowers, the air thick with memories too faint to name. The ground was soft beneath my feet, and the sky was awash of lavender and silver. The shadows here moved differently. They drifted slowly, curling around petals and leaves like old friends sharing secrets. Some were small, like the shadow of a sparrow's wing. Others stretched long and thin, like branches reaching for the moon. I wandered among them, tracing their edges with my fingers. Each shadow carried a story. One whispered of a child's lost laughter beneath a willow tree. Another held the echo of a song forgotten by time. A third flickered with the image of a faded photograph, edges curled and torn. I sat on a moss-covered bench, watching the shadows mingle. They weren't trapped. They were waiting. Waiting to be remembered. I reached into the folds of my robe and pulled out a tiny lantern, its light soft and golden. I lit it, and the shadows stirred. They leaned toward the glow, stretching and shifting. Slowly, they began to untangle. As the light grew brighter, the garden transformed. The vines lifted like curtains. Flowers bloomed in slow motion, and the air hummed with a gentle warmth. The whisper smiled. "You see, Serelith," she said softly, "even shadows long to be found." I nodded, feeling the weight of forgotten moments lifting. That night, the grandfather clock sang a lullaby, its chimes weaving through my dreams. Yarrow perched on my windowsill, feathers shimmering like twilight. And I dreamed of gardens where shadows dance in the light. Rivers have their own language. They sing of journeys. They whisper of places they've touched. But not all rivers flow the same way. Some rivers move against the tide. Some carry stories not from the past, but from futures unseen. This river was one of those. The whisper of when met me by a silver shore, where water shimmered with stars even in daylight. She offered me a small wooden boat, carved with ancient runes that pulsed faintly beneath my fingers. I stepped in, feeling the soft sway beneath my feet. The river murmured secrets as we drifted. The current pulled us gently upstream. The world around us blurred. The trees stretched tall and thin, the sky folded like paper. We passed fish that shimmered with faces half remembered. We passed stones carved with names not yet spoken. I leaned over the side and dipped my hand in the water. It was cold, but alive, vibrating softly, like a heartbeat in time with the river's flow. I saw reflections, not of what was, but of what could be. A child taking first steps. A story waiting to be told. The whisper spoke without words. She showed me how the river carried moments, some lived, some imagined, all flowing backward and forward at once. I closed my eyes and listened. The river sang of hope, of possibility, of time not as a line, but as a circle, a spiral, a dance. When we reached the shore again, I stepped out feeling lighter. The river had given me a gift, not of answers, but of knowing. That time is never lost, only waiting. That night, the grandfather clock ticked softly, like a heartbeat in the dark. Yarrow nestled close, his feathers glowing faintly, and I dreamed of rivers that flow both ways, carrying dreams and memories alike. There is a silence that is loud, a stillness that feels heavy, like the pause just before a heartbeat. And sometimes, the hardest places to enter are the ones within ourselves. This was such a place. The whisper of when did not come this time. Instead, I found myself standing before a plain, unmarked wall. No windows, no hinges, no keyhole. Just an endless surface of smooth stone, cold to the touch. I pressed my palm against it. Nothing. I whispered my name. No answer. The room without a door held its breath. I sat down in front of the wall. The air smelled faintly of old paper and distant rain. I closed my eyes and listened. To the quiet. To the space inside me I'd never dared explore. Minutes passed like minutes always do. Or maybe they didn't. Time felt stretched thin, like silk pulled between fingers. Slowly, a soft warmth grew where my heart had settled. A faint glow shimmered beneath my skin. I reached out and touched the wall again. This time, it shifted. Not like stone breaking, more like a veil parting. I stepped forward, not through a door, but through myself, into a space that was both nowhere and everywhere. A quiet place where time didn't rush or linger, where I could simply be. The room without a door was not a prison. It was a sanctuary, a place to rest between moments, to gather strength before continuing. I sat there a long while, and when I finally stood, the wall behind me was still plain and unmarked. But I knew. I had opened a door no one else could see. That night, the grandfather clock ticked in soft whispers. Yarrow curled around my shoulders, a feathered warmth. And I dreamed of rooms without doors, places where the soul can breathe. Stars usually fade. They burn bright, then dim, then disappear into the endless night. But not all stars follow this path. Some linger longer. Some refuse to leave. Some stars carry memories too bright to fade. I found this star one evening, when the sky was a deep velvet blue sprinkled with silver dust. The whisper of when was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I noticed a faint glow near the horizon, soft, pulsing, stubborn. A star that should have flickered out long ago. I reached out to catch it. It was warm, gentle, like the last ember of a dying fire. Inside it, I saw flashes. A child laughing under a summer sky. A promise whispered in the dark. A moment stretched beyond its time. The star trembled in my hands. I understood then. This star was holding on to a moment someone else had lost. A hope someone else still carried in their heart. I whispered a blessing. May you shine until you are ready to rest. The star pulsed brighter. And then, slowly, it began to move. Not away from me, but closer, until it nestled in my palm like a heartbeat. I tucked the star safely into my robe. It glowed softly through the night, and when morning came, it still shone. That night, the grandfather clock ticked steady and sure. Yarrow perched silently beside me, feathers shimmering with dawn's first light. And I dreamed of stars that refused to fade, and the quiet strength of holding on. Footsteps are stories. each one a mark left behind, a whisper on a path, a trace in the dust, a promise of passage. But some footsteps disappear. Forgotten, erased, as if they never happened. This path was lined with such traces. The whisper of when found me standing at the edge of a forest. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a scent both fresh and ancient. Before me stretched a narrow trail, barely visible, winding through the trees like a silver thread. I took the first step. The ground beneath was soft, almost silent. With every footfall, I felt the pulse of those who had walked before, those who had vanished from memory. Along the path, I found things left behind, a worn shoe half buried in moss, a faded scarf caught on a branch, a child's drawing pressed into bark. Each was a story waiting to be told again. The forest whispered names, soft, scattered like leaves in the breeze. Names of people who had been forgotten, but whose footsteps still sang beneath the earth. I reached down and touched the shoe. It hummed with quiet life. I closed my eyes and imagined the person who wore it. Their laughter, their tears, their journey. The path grew brighter with each memory I gathered. Footsteps once lost were now illuminated, traced in golden light. At the path's end, I stood before a mirror-clear lake. The surface reflected not just my image, but all the faces and stories I had found. I smiled softly. To be remembered is to live again, I whispered. And in remembering, we walk forward together. That night, the grandfather clock ticked with gentle purpose. Yarrow rested beside me, his feathers warm and comforting. And I dreamed of paths woven from footsteps and the quiet power of memory. Time is not only what we hear, it is also the spaces in between, the silence that stretches just beyond the ticking clock, the pause where moments fold softly into one another. This silence was a language all its own. The whisper of when guided me to a small room bathed in soft grey light. A single clock hung on the wall, its hands still. No ticking, no chiming. Just a gentle quiet that seemed to breathe. I sat down on the floor, feeling the stillness settle around me. At first, it was strange, empty, but then I began to listen. Not with my ears, with my heart. The silence was filled with whispers, soft echoes of moments just past. Hints of futures waiting to bloom. I breathed slowly, felt the quiet swell inside me. The space between each tick held everything, the past, the present, the yet to come. In that silence, I found peace. Not in rushing forward, or holding on tightly, but in simply being. When I finally stood, the clock's hands began to move again. Slowly, deliberately. That night, the grandfather clock ticked with renewed calm. Yarrow nestled close, his feathers brushing gently against my cheek. And I dreamed of silence, the quiet heartbeat between the seconds. Dawn is patient. It waits in the quiet hours, not rushing, but sure. A slow unfolding of light and hope. This dawn was a promise. The whisper of when appeared as the first pale light touched the horizon. Together, we watched the sky change, from deep indigo to soft rose, from stillness to gentle stirring. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every star still shining faintly, waited. I felt the warmth of possibility, the hope of beginnings not yet written. The air was cool and soft, carrying the scent of dew and new dreams. Yarrow perched nearby, his feathers catching the first golden rays. The dawn whispered to me that time is not just measured by endings, but by every soft awakening, every quiet step forward. I breathed in deeply, ready to carry the light within me. That morning, the grandfather clock chimed once, clear and bright. A new hour had begun, and I dreamed of dawns waiting patiently, of light breaking softly, of time's gentle, endless promise. Thank you for listening to this light story. If you enjoyed this lovely tale, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Light Story Club will be here for when you want to listen to another chronicle to help you rest. Goodbye for now.